Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia. Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert Forto and you're listening to Mushing Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can hear all of our episodes over on dogworksradio.com. And be sure to check us out on social media by searching Dogworks Radio. And I am joined tonight by my co-host, Toni Reitter, calling in from Kenai, Alaska. Toni, how's it going?
Going pretty well. It's raining finally, so hopefully some of this dry weather will go away so that we can not worry about the threat of forest fires, and maybe some of the ones that are going on will stop, or at least start to be controlled.
Yes, it is a beautiful summer up here in Alaska. I spent the last week or so down in the lower 48, including going to the International Sled Dog Racing Association convention and conference, and got a chance to sit down and speak with Jesse Holmes for quite a while. It looks like he is doing well. He was one of the keynote speakers, and it's always fun to get together with fellow mushers and talk about all aspects of the sport, even though this was mainly a sprint musher conference with Jesse there and several others. It encompassed the whole sport, and it's exciting to see how vibrant the sport is. So it's always good to sit down and chat. But we have a lot on our plate, don't we, Toni?
We do. Everybody decided to drop news on the mushing world all at once this week.
And like we've said over and over again, the sport of mushing is becoming a year-long sport, isn't it?
It is. We may not be racing, though many are starting to take up dryland racing. Excuse me. And but yeah, there's news almost 24/7 thanks to the art of social media. So even though it may not be breaking news that the local media outlets like to pick up on, if you're a mushing fan, if you're a musher, it's pretty big news almost all the time. And when it's not news, it's gossip.
Yes, and we're going to cover a little bit of that news and gossip, but we have a big story that broke pretty soon after our last podcast, and that was the sled dog Leon was found near McGrath. What do you know about Leon and his fantastic adventure through the state of Alaska?
It's funny. It wasn't announced for a few days, but he was found the day that we went to air or went and did our last podcast. So of course, it always seems to happen, the breaking news right after we do our podcast. But Leon was found, I believe, outside of McGrath by one of the local villagers who basically, my understanding is, befriended this dog. He worked on getting this dog's trust for quite a while by feeding him and just talking nice to him and being very, very patient. And this skittish, lost little dog finally trusted his rescuer enough to be caught. And so they were able to contact, I believe, Mick Petit and one of his kennel partners, Katie Lloyd, and they were able to reunite him with his musher, Sebastian, who had to fly, I believe, from France. I'm not completely sure if he was there or if he was in Canada. So yeah, they were able to reunite once they got him back here in Alaska. But it seems like a misadventure in getting them home from Anchorage. They bounced back and forth between flying out of Anchorage, flying out of Fairbanks. I didn't read the full story, but I think it took several tries to get them both on the same flight. Every time you turned around, they were posting that, they're on their way, and then they'd find out that something got delayed or canceled. So I believe they're back home now. With everything from the forest fires in the area of McGrath, the fact that we went from winter to spring to summer and the rivers breaking up, no ice, I think a lot of us were thinking that this was not going to have the happy ending that we ended up having. Though I'm sure some did believe that, being a sled dog, Leon had a better chance of making it. And of course they were right. But yeah, I think Leon is now not only Iditarod legend, but I think he's even surpassed Wrong Way May, who was the dog, I believe, from Jim Lanier's kennel a few years ago, who went missing on the Iditarod Trail and walked herself back home to her kennel. So this is not the first time Iditarod's had something like this happen, and every time we've had a happy ending. So always fun to start off with happy news.
So I have a couple of thoughts on this. My first thought is, how in the world did they keep this under wraps for so long? Like you mentioned, it were several days, and with the craziness of social media, and I know Nick and his kennel partners are very active on Facebook and on Twitter. How in the world did they keep this hush hush for so long?
I think it helps that in the case of where the dog was found, it is McGrath, so it is one of the bigger hubs in rural or bush Alaska. Social media isn't as big a deal there. There's still very much a community that talks to each other face to face. So I think that helps. I know that Katie Lloyd posted that it was very, very difficult for her to not say something right away when they first found out that the dog had been found, Leon had been found, but that she did not want to post until they were back basically on the road system, so that just in case something went wrong, it didn't get everybody's hopes up. So, I think it's just Katie is very media savvy, and so even though most mushers kind of have issues, either they clam up or they say the wrong thing or whatever, I think with Katie being involved, it also helps kind of keep things under wraps. I was really surprised that the Iditarod got to break the story, because I believe they posted before she or Nick did. So I think that also helps fans feel a little better that maybe all of the emotion and drama that surrounded the story, maybe we're starting to see a clean slate from there.
Secondly, I was surprised how good Leon looked. I mean, he looked healthy. Right. You had mentioned that he was befriended by a local villager there in McGrath or right around there. But my goodness, he looked pretty dang good. I would expect him to look, very thin, emaciated, but he looked like a typical sled dog, didn't he?
He did. He looked like, most of the dogs do after they reach Nome. But, that's to be expected because he was surviving. But clearly he did really well. I don't know if that means he was snacking on things that he was finding on trap lines, or if he was actually becoming, a wild dog and taking down his own meals, or if I don't know. The guy who found him there in McGrath probably is a really good dog chef, and so was giving him all the tasty victuals to try and coax him into coming home. So, he looked really good. They did say he was a little on the thin side, and they showed videos of him eating French fries there at dinner time. So they'll fatten him up pretty quickly. He'll be a happy little sled dog again.
And lastly, what I wanted to mention with the Leon story is, as you said, it was almost 3 months from the time he went missing until he was found. 2.5 months or so. I guess it was earlier in the month of June. That's a heck of a long time. And as you said, by then all the snow had melted. Of course, the rivers were open, And in previous cases, of course, you had mentioned, I believe you said her name was May. She literally ran down the snowpack trail on her way home. But this little dog really traversed some country, didn't he?
Yeah, I think so. I think it helps that, he went from Ruby to McGrath. So I would assume that he traveled most of that distance while it was still um, relatively frozen in that area. And then I would guess one of the reasons why he was able to stick around McGrath for as long as he did and befriend one of the villagers is because there was no trail to follow anymore. And so he had to really rely on the kindness of strangers, and he just happened to be in Mushing country. That's where Mushing started, was with the indigenous people of Alaska and the Arctic, and Canada too. I don't want to offend anybody. It's not just an Alaskan thing; it's an Arctic thing. But yeah, so they know, just in their culture, they know more about sled dogs than even most of us that have grown up with them in the racing world. And so I'm sure it was just a dog whisperer thing, and we're very, very fortunate, and I'm sure Sebastian is indebted to the community of McGrath for this.
So, Toni, one other Iditarod story before we jump into the big topic of the day, and that is the Iditarod Volunteer Picnic and Signups. That will be next week. We're recording on the 17th, and that will be, I believe it's next Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right?
You are correct. It's always the last Saturday in June. It's the Volunteer Appreciation Picnic and also the Musher signups. They have, I think that's the finale of their teachers event. So a lot of things are happening. It's a lot of fun. It's very informal. It doesn't cost anything to go out there, and you get to hobnob with some of the mushers. It's been a long day. So it feels more Iditarod to me than some of the other big events surrounding the start of Iditarod, just because it's so informal. The mushers are talking to each other. There are no nerves. It's just a lot of fun. It's where volunteers get to see each other without our parkas. So it's a good time, and if you're local and in the area, I'm sure they'll love to have you. They've been advertising it on social media, so it's not like it's a secret.
So in this event, as you mentioned, it's also the signups for next year's Iditarod. So here we are, what is it, 8.5 months or so before the race, but it's definitely a time to really start thinking about the race. And a lot of people typically sign up during this time, and there's some incentive to do so. Is that right?
There are. The musher has to be present for it. So even though, they sign up, they can sign up either online, by mail, or in person. If they're in person, they get their names put into a hat. And at the end of the event, they can win door prizes. And the one that they all stick around for is 2 mushers have their names drawn to win their entry fee back, which I believe is still $4,000 this year. I haven't actually looked to see what the requirements are, but that's a huge chunk of change. And sometimes there's really great stories. I know that there was one, I believe, last year where 2 mushers kind of went in and said, if you win, I'll split it with you. And that's what happened a few years before that. Battle Dogs Kennel, they had a huge kind of setback financially with their generator blowing up and catching fire and all of that. And Mitch Seavey was one of the mushers that won that year, his entry fee back, and he turned right around and signed that check over to Battle Dogs so that they could get back up and running. And we see that quite a bit. When that entry fee is won back, sometimes there's a lot of generosity that goes on. So again, that's why I really enjoy the picnic. There's not a lot of competition. It's a lot of fun. It's informal. and you really see the personalities come out that aren't just trying to be, game face on. So
I have I have never had a chance to go to that picnic. Always end up doing something else during that time. But I understand that maybe my understanding is wrong. But is it a picnic itself, or is the food available for everybody, or only for the mushers and the volunteers?
I think it's supposed to be for the mushers and the volunteers, and the teachers that come up for the teachers conference. But there's always so much food that they start begging people to eat. So I think the rule is that you sign up for, it's one of those groups of people. But I don't know, you just go over to the table and sign up. I've never really had to show ID or anything. So.
There you have it.
I'm going to get in trouble, man. I'm going to get in trouble. They're going to hear this and they're going to be like, dude, stop telling all our secrets.
So are you going to come up to Wasilla this year, or do you have other plans?
Heck yeah. Yeah, no, I'm coming up for sure. My dad was planning on coming with me, but I'm not sure we're pretty sure he's torn his MCL, so I don't know if he'll be there. He did go one year, and when he had his foot worked on and he wheeled around on his little knee scooter. So, I mean, it's possible Dad'll come, but I'll for sure be there.
Well, there you have it. So we will have a reporter on site. So if you get any cool stories, hit record on whatever phone you're using, and maybe we can use some of those on an upcoming show. So that is next week. And of course, we will give an update when we air our next episode for sure. So let's jump over to the Yukon Quest. We've talked a lot about the Yukon Quest during this off season. A lot of drama, a lot of speculation, a lot of stories, a lot of he said, she said, a lot of back and forth between the two boards. But it looks like last week some news broke. What happened?
Yeah, so we're definitely not seeing 1,000-mile race this year, or this coming season. They're still split. The Canadian side has seen a shakeup with the board. Most of the 2022 board members stepped down for the 2023 season, including President Susan Rogan. Hans Scott is off of the board. Sebastian Schnula also stepped down. So they did list quite a few on their Facebook page on the 15th, who the new board of directors included. There's Ann Taylor, Frank Turner, who was on the board last year, still going to be on there. Nathaniel Hamlin, Ed Hopkins, Carol Locke. There are a few others. But the majority of the board from the last couple of years did step down. They also announced for the Canada side the plan for the 2023 race. They're going to have a 450-mile, a 250-mile, and a 100-mile. They announced on the 15th, but on the 14th, the Yukon Quest Alaska, which has its own Facebook page now. Canada's still using the main page, but Alaska has its own. They reported that, and I'm trying to pull it up here real quick. They also reported their plans for 2023. They will have a 550-mile race starting in Fairbanks, and it will end in Tok, which I believe is what the plan was in 2022, and weather totally messed that up. So we'll see if that actually works. But they ended that statement with the goal of expanding to a full 1,000-mile race for 2024. One of the big reasons why they're sticking with the 550 is because they are working on getting financially sound so that they can run a larger race. Because as we know, you double that amount of mileage, you're going to need to at least double your infrastructure for that type of race, especially in the area of Alaska that they're going to be running in. They will also still have the Yukon Quest 300, which will follow the traditional Alaska side of that race. And then there is a new race that is going to be an 80-mile, quote-unquote, fun run from Fairbanks to Pleasant Valley and back. The sign-ups for the Alaska race will be on August 6th. So it's looking like things are going in the right direction so that we will still have races. But I think this might be that nail in the coffin we were worried about, where I don't think we're going to have a Canadian-Alaskan partnership in the near future, if at all. I think there might be hope just with the shakeup of the board on the Canadian side, but it doesn't look like the Alaska side had the same kind of shakeup. So I don't know which egos work best with which egos, or if they're even considering coming back and working together. Alaska seems very keen on going back to a 1,000-mile race, but I think what makes the Yukon Quest so special is it does cross that border and go into Canada and vice versa. So it's kind of a sad news story, but at the same time, it's not like the Quest is going away completely.
A couple of quick questions, Toni. It sounds like you know a little bit more than I do. You had mentioned that the signups for the Alaska side is in August, which is quite a bit earlier than normal. Typically, the signups are later in the summer, early fall, sometimes even to October. Do you have any idea on dates? If I remember correctly, I think that they're going to run the Alaska races at the same time when they ran the typical Yukon Quest, so a couple of weeks before Iditarod, mid-February-ish. Do you know any dates for those races and or the races in the Canadian side?
Yeah, I started scrolling down to see if I could find that. February 4th is going to be for the Alaska race, and let me just pull up the Canadian side again real quick if I can, trusting technology to actually work. I don't remember seeing a date on that, but honestly, I focused so much on kind of the shakeup of the board. It felt very much like when Iditarod had to do something similar back in 2018. So let's see. It's Canada will be February 18th, and they are and they are doing all three races on that day, it looks like, as well. So Saturday, February 18th. So essentially, I mean, I guess we could see like they did this year where Brent Sass ran both quests.
Yeah, that's my thoughts as well. At least they are not washing out each other. They're going to at least have them on different days. So at least there's some friendship, at least on that side, for sure. The other point I want to make, and this is more of a musher's side of the things compared to what we had mentioned on the news side, you had mentioned that it was going to start in Fairbanks and end in Tok, and the press release said that a good majority of that race will follow the Taylor Highway. I don't know if they're going to run on the highway itself or they're going to, cut a trail along the highway there, but that is a much different type of race if they do run on the highway compared to how the traditional Yukon Quest is, which is a very, remote, rugged type trail, on rivers and through mountain passes, etc. If they're running on the highway, that's a much different race. I would not say easier, but definitely a little bit more manageable than the traditional route. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think I remember something about that when they were trying to do that trail for this last race. And I think they are following trails and not going exactly on the highway, but it's very close to the highway, which is kind of how like the Tuscany 200 runs. I think the Copper Basin also runs along the highway for quite a while before going into the Lakey area. It's different. I think it would make it more Iditarod feeling in some ways. It's not as remote, so that, you still have people able to stop and kind of watch as you're going through. But a little more paved, I guess, not necessarily groomed, but it's not, like you said, it's not as remote. Unless the storm blows in during the race, the trail is going to be well marked, it's going to be well groomed, it's going to be run over. Most of the Iditarod, you're running on snow machine trails, well patched trails that are there for the locals to use. And I think you'll see that probably a little bit more on this run from Fairbanks to Tok than you necessarily see in the Quest. I'm not completely sure what it looks like, but it's kind of exciting for me. I have family that live in Tok, like my favorite cousin, who is my only cousin on my dad's side, but she's my favorite. They live in Tok, so it could be that this will be the year that I go see the Quest.
And one last point there on my side, at least, is they are going to, as we said, start in Fairbanks, end in Fairbanks, but they're going to have a quote unquote party in Tok. So they're going to do the finishers banquet back in Fairbanks, but they're going to do some type of banquet or something in Tok as well. And I think that that's a great nod to that community there. That's really going to help bring out the local support and all that.
Everybody wants to eat at Fast Eddie's, so I mean,
it's a good place. I've been there a few times for sure. So my last question to you, Toni, before we go, is what is the fans' perspective of this? What are they thinking? What are they talking about on social media now that we have sort of a plan? And it looks like, as you said, the end pass will probably remain. We aren't going to see that 1,000-mile race that we've anticipated not happening, at least since we've been talking about it in the off season.
It's been either the Iditarod fans who just kind of casually watch the Quest, asking for basically the cliff notes on how did we get here. And then you have the longer standing fans who are just really very bummed that they could not come to a more agreeable conclusion that got us to travel from Canada to Alaska or Alaska to Canada. I think my feelings are very similar to what I've read online, where it's just a bummer that we're seeing the race change so dramatically. That was something that the Quest really prided itself on. They like to say that they were tougher than the Iditarod. They like to say they were more in the spirit of traditional mushing than the Iditarod. And now they're basically a longer mid-distance race right now. And it's not because of global warming. It's not because of animal rights. It's because boards mismanaged their partnership. And so I think there's a lot of frustration and a lot of, we don't know everything. We weren't in those meetings. We weren't privy to everything, but it's still such a bummer. It's just like when we were all worried that the Iditarod was coming to an end in 18 when everything went down after the 2017 race. It just feels very uneasy. This is not the time for mushing to implode even in one race, much less one of the premier races.
And I know that we've covered on this show many times, in particular when Alex and I hosted the off-season shows, we always talked about what is the future of mushing and what are we going to see in the next few years? And we always talked about a few things: economics, climate change, animal rights, and politics. And I think that this is squarely on the politics side, at least on this race. Often, I've been around mushing a long time, almost 30 years now, and politics are always a huge deal in this sport. And I think that is what kind of cooked the goose, if you will, for the Yukon Quest. Do you agree?
Yeah, it happens with any niche sport, and even with something like the NFL, the NBA, any of that, we see it. We saw a strike with the baseball and everything, and I didn't really care because it was baseball. But, the politics ruins everything. and I hate that it's a part of sport. And we're not talking, presidential or anything when we're talking politics, but it is basically the same thing. It's everybody thinking that their way is the right way and everybody else is wrong. And we're coming to a time in our culture and our society, not just in the U.S., but I think globally, where there's not a lot of, meeting in the middle. There's not a lot of reaching across the aisle and shaking hands and saying, for the betterment of the sport, for the betterment of this race, we're going to set some of our issues aside and we're going to come at this and act like adults and work this out. Instead of every time we don't get our way, we're just going to pick up our toys and pick up our sponsorships and go elsewhere. We used to joke in the church circles that I was in that, if the pastor said something you didn't like, you'd pick up and you'd move and you'd build another church just down the road. And that's kind of what this feels like. We've got 2 Yukon Quest. They literally will not drop that name, but we have 2 Yukon Quests now, and it's confusing and muddling, and I just wish that they could come together.
Well, Toni, you're squarely on the podcasting soapbox. That's what this is all about, is to be able to provide opinion, and that is what makes podcasting special. So to end this show, Toni, I would love to find out from our listeners what they think. Maybe drop us a line in the comments. Yep. Let us know on social media what your thoughts are about the stories we talked about today. Leon and him being found and safe at home in France, we assume by now. What do you think about the Iditarod signups and the picnic coming up in a couple of weeks, or actually in a week now that we're recording today? And lastly, what are your thoughts on the Yukon Quest and sort of the nature of the sport and how politics plays a role? We would love to hear what you think and keep the discussion going. Toni, did we miss anything before we go?
I'm sure we've probably missed something. We're going to log off of here, and then 2 seconds later, some big news story is going to break. That just seems to be our trend. So I'm really excited. Thank you for letting me stand on my soapbox and let me ramble. But I think we're good.
We're good. So on behalf of my co-host, this is Robert for Dogworks Radio and Mushing Radio. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio. Did you know that Alaska Dogworks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dogworks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.